Thanks for coming. This is the first session of the day. Welcome to Fiber Festival 2025, the Context Program. The title of the session today is Archiving Wild Practices. My name is Alexander Scholz. I'm a writer, organizer, and publisher in Berlin. Together with my Canadian colleague, Greg Smith, I run Holo. Holo is an independent media imprint that explores critical creative practice, where art, science, technology, and culture intersect. We've been around since 2012, are best known for our periodicals. We do a lot of publishing on the web as well, and our work is deeply intertwined with festivals like this one. This year marks the 10th anniversary of Fiber Festival, so we thought that we take this opportunity to not look into the future as we usually do at these kinds of festivals, but look into the past, because it turns out the past is at stake. And that's not me saying this, I just refer to experts. In 2021, Berlin's Neue Gesellschaft für Bildende Kunst hosted Networks of Care, a series of idea exchanges named after a term coined by Dutch curator and digital art researcher Anne Dekker, who I'm sure will come up frequently in this conversation. And in these Networks of Care sessions, cultural experts explored how to preserve temporary, ephemeral, project-based, or collective practices. And in her conclusion, art historian and conservatist Anna Schäfler writes, in dealing with archives, estates, artistic and curatorial projects, we have found that, especially in self-organized, non-institutionalized, non-profit sectors, there is a lack of capacity and financial resources to develop strategies for adequately handling the preservation of practices that operate in collective, representation-critical, or process-oriented ways. The often fleeting realities of relational, immaterial, and project-based working methods rarely find a counterpart in existing preservation conventions, which are still strongly focused on the material condition. Alternative forms and structures of preservation are needed to strengthen the diverse scenes and practices beyond existing public museums, archives, and libraries, so that they do not simply disappear because they do not fit into the normative frameworks of work form and singular authorship, or not a market or are not market compatible. So this echoes pretty much the conversations that I've been having with festival makers, people that work within small organizations over the past few years. When it comes to documenting, archiving, and preservation, everyone struggles with the same challenges: a lack of capacity and resources, a lack of knowledge and expertise, a lack of tools and infrastructure. And the smaller the festival, the smaller the organization, the more dire the situation. The moment the funding runs out, the website starts to rot, these records start disappearing, often long before the value of the organization's contributions are recognized. And at the end of the day, our histories are written by large institutions that have the means to build and maintain deep archives. And if we get lucky, we get mentioned in a collateral way, that some of these moments and voices from our space find their way into institutional archives. So as a writer and a publisher, I'm confronted with this loss of cultural memory on a daily basis, pretty much. And reconstructing these lost histories of cultural niches, the digital arts, media arts, has become increasingly difficult. Our work, that of artists, curators, festival makers, organizations, and institutions, is deeply interconnected and codependent, and so are our histories. Preserving them cannot be the job of any one organization alone. It's a shared responsibility, and it's the work that requires solidarity, cooperation, and conversations at the grassroots level. So how can we build these networks of care that preserve these ephemeral contexts, records of relationships in our cultural memory in times of austerity, platform enshittification, and AI slop? What can these networks look like? How do we interface with them, and how do we govern them? So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about today. I have excellent guests for this conversation. All experts in who archive and deal with media art and digital art histories in different ways. And I hope that we, myself included, the audience, artists, curators, people that work in culture in the audience can learn a thing or two about preserving and safeguarding our collective heritage. To my left is Gaby Wijers, founder and director of Lima, a pioneering platform for digital art and media art here in Amsterdam that specializes in archiving, conservation, and distribution since the days of video. Tuned in via the internet, invisible to me, is Dragan Espenschied, media artist, musician, and preservation director at Rhizome, a New York-based nonprofit organization with an extensive preservation program focused on born digital art and culture. And then also tuned in via the internet is Cathy van Eck, a composer, sound artist, and a member of the Instrument Inventors Initiative, an artist-run community platform supporting interdisciplinary practices that, and she's here because they do really interesting work in terms of preservation. They do preserve or archive sound art through publication, through print, which, you know, is real close to my heart. Yeah, Jarl was supposed to be here as well. He is not, so yeah, I will report back to him. I will let my guests introduce themselves and let them talk a little bit about their work. To set the stage. Gaby, why don't you take it away?
Okay, thank you for your kind introduction. Lima is a small institute with a huge network and a huge impact in collecting, selecting, preserving media art. We use the term media art as a kind of umbrella term to its video, it's software-based, it's net art, it's sound-based. Artworks that we take care of. At one hand, we're an agency. That means we, in this case, we don't produce, but we do distribute. So we make a selection, and then in collaboration with the artists, we promote and present these works. We do that over time. Lima is only 12.5 years old, but we're coming from a long tradition from the 70s, starting with Montevideo and time-based arts, grassroots institutions here in Amsterdam. And in between, there was also the Netherlands Media Art Institute, a larger institute with really some tasks in relation to collecting and presenting media artworks. As an agency, we present media artworks over time worldwide. By doing that, we gained a lot of knowledge how to. That also means that we present artworks from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, not only video works, but also installations and software-based artworks. That's one hand. At the other hand, over the years, we did a lot of research, sometimes more art historical, sometimes more technical. For instance, how to preserve a VR work or how to preserve an Amiga-based artwork. And this knowledge is available. We do once a year a symposium. It's called Transformation Digital Art. It's about archiving, documenting, preservation of media art. And we have a whole infrastructure where the Dutch museums and collections and also private collectors, they use this infrastructure in a way they outsource the storage and maintenance of their media artworks to us. And we are in many different networks, more contemporary art networks, more museum networks, festival networks, but also, of course, everything in collaboration with the artists.
Great, thank you. How about you, Dragan?
Okay, hi, thanks very much for inviting me here. And so my name is Dragan Espenschied. I'm the preservation director at Rhizome. I'm working for that organization for a decade now. So Rhizome was founded in 1996 by the artist Mark Tribe at the dawn of the new media art era, kind of as a mailing list initially, and it has grown over the years, or changed over the years, into it was like a blogging platform, a social media platform, it's becoming more and more of an institution and also actually a memory institution of that field. So we specialize in net art, artistic games, I would say overall software. And already in 1999, Rhizome launched the Artbase project, which allowed basically people from the community to declare themselves artists and upload their stuff to Rhizome. And this has now changed to a very curatorially directed model. But our collection is 2,200 plus works. For 850 plus works, we have actual digital artifacts available. Some were just submitted as links and are maybe still there, maybe not. And Rhizome also doesn't have a fixed exhibition space. We do exhibitions around like different partnerships. But yeah, so we are part community organization, part institution, part memory institution. And during my time at Rhizome, it was always my goal to develop meaningful abstractions to handle digital art from a preservation perspective. And I found it like very fun, kind of, that there are all these different terms that have been assigned to like new media art or digital art. So first of all, it's new, and then it's maybe complex objects is something that you often hear, or is ephemeral or fleeting or performative. And then now we also have wild, as it seems. I want to see if that term also sticks. Yeah, so we are having, so my goal was always to build infrastructure with reproducible processes, so that you don't start like from the beginning with every artwork. And for me, that was to regard everything as software, to think about what do you need to recall software performance. And yeah, let's see where this conversation takes us.
Thank you. Cathy?
Yes, I'm representing III today, which is the Instrument Inventors Initiative. We were founded in 2013, and it's an organization we are a community platform, which means that we have different kinds of outputs and inputs. We organize events. We have a space in The Hague, and we also have studios for artists, and we do also have artists in residencies there. We also organize events outside of III, so we host different, for example, we work together with the Rewire Festival in The Hague, but also with partners abroad. And we have all kinds of network connections to other institutions doing similar stuff, and also doing exchange with artists of them and of us. And one of the things we decided, so it's not our major project at all, but one of the things we decided was, how are we going to document some of the works made at III and by III members or artists connected to an organization. And that's where when we decided to make a documentation in the form of blueprint, so that's what why I'm here today, because we make this blueprint, which is a very small project. Actually, of all the projects we do, I think it's one of our smallest projects, and we have only made 3 till now. There are few nearly finished, and I'm doing the organizational work beyond the blueprint, getting everybody doing the things they have to do to finish the blueprint, which is essentially a paper-based documentation, information, reenactment possibility of the artwork we document. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. You don't happen to have a copy that you could show?
I have them. I didn't know if this
Excellent.
was the moment
I
already.
also have a copy with me, so if anybody wants to have a peek afterwards, I'm happy to share. But maybe you can hold it up so people can understand, because it's gorgeous, gorgeous publications.
So it's that's one of the decisions we took, is that the documentation, it's made also by there are illustrations, like these illustrations for every blueprint are made together with the artist documented, and by Janine Verloop, and the whole layout is made by Maarten van Manen. So we work together with them and they, like, every you can't see it, I think, but every blueprint has a slightly different paper. There's always the blue color of the blueprint, so to say, and then there's one extra color depending on the publication. So they are really trying to make it a kind of artwork. The publication should be an artwork in itself. That's one of the goals.
Right. So thank you very much for your introductions. I thought a good place to start this conversation is by defining terms a little bit, because we, the uninitiated, we use the words documentation, archives, preservation often interchangeably when they're not the same thing. And this ambiguity and confusion has implications for how we organize our histories, how we approach archivists, how we document. And for festivals, for example, oftentimes I hear that the archive is last year's website, right? And the question is that sufficient? Does that constitute an archive? So maybe Gaby and Dragan, maybe you can, like, from your conservationist, preservationist perspective as specialists, can you maybe clarify these terms of memory construction and kind of explain what they entail, and maybe where they overlap?
I can start, and of course there are so many different connotations of what is an archive, what is documentation, what is preservation, and don't forget conservation. I was mixing it up with conversation. Now conservation. Yeah. Old school. The archive is the definition of the material you produce or you use during your work, or for instance, our email correspondence about this panel would belong to the archive. But if you consider the festival archive, then there can be a communication archive, there can be a more artistic archive in relation to all the events. There can be a more strategic archive where all the policy documents are in. There can be a video archive. There is a photo archive. There are so many different archives. But for sure, a lot of information and sources are to be found in the archive. For instance, maybe if there is an exhibition, or if there are live events on stage, there might be instructions about how to install or how to involve with the audience. Information that not necessarily is to be found somewhere else. That can also differ from the one exhibition or the one execution to another. So it can be quite unique. Documentation. You could say the video recording of this session is documentation, since it's a representation of what we're doing, of the event. And you could also say the blueprints is an artwork, here we go, and documentation. And the whole process of making the blueprints could be the archive.
Right, but the blueprints themselves are not an archive.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. You could of course, you can consider them to be an archive. And then preservation. Of course, you can preserve emails and you can preserve video. But in this perspective, I'm the most interested in how to preserve the artworks that are presented. And then, of course, you can make documentation out of this. so you have a lot of information about the artworks, but for preservation, I would consider a way of documenting and storing that the work itself can be executed and experienced. So, and there's a lot of more. Ask Annette, there will be different definitions. Ask Dragan, he will have different. Ask anyone, and they will have different definitions.
Dragan, do you want to add your definition?
With pleasure. So I think there are like two how to say problematic dimensions here with definitions, which is as Gaby just said, the terms themselves vary even if you don't involve any kind of new media computer stuff. But then also if you start working with computers do whatever you tell them, and if you tell them an archive looks like this, or this is what documentation is supposed to be, you can build a system that exactly does that, and then you manifested that idea and you will be stuck with it. And most of these ideas like come from media, like from my perspective, that are not software. So you can, I don't know, archive emails, let's say, as Gaby had as an example. So in many cases, this will be archived like traditional correspondence, maybe in the forms of PDFs. And if you are really fancy, you might get an mbox, like an email kind of local email format that you could then browse. And then from my perspective, the software that you browse that with is also incredibly important. So if people, for instance, use Outlook versus some webmailer also, they will get very different, they will encounter email very differently, especially when you think about, I don't know, phenomena like an email virus that spreads through different systems that only works with Outlook and so forth. So there is some, there's a lot of space that you can go around here and defining what it is. But also, I think the most important thing that you should do as an institution or as as anybody who is interested in preservation is define your preservation goals. Because I believe that the website of last year's festival is not too bad. I wouldn't talk it down at all, because many festivals don't even have that. And if you say, which is like a goal that I have and that Rhizome represents, is that you want to be able to execute legacy software and you want to be able to historicize software, then you need to like build your infrastructure so that it does that for you. And regarding documentation, I also feel that with software, there's not necessarily such a clear distinction in between documentation and like the real artwork in many cases. Or there is maybe a performative center of the artwork that is like the actual software doing something, and everything around is more like sliding into documentation the more you move away from the performative center. So best example or easiest example for that is you have an internet artwork, a website, a net artwork from 1999 where people used to link to other places on the internet. And you might get hold of that, what is considered the core of the artwork, like the website or the online community system or a platform or whatever an artist made. And there are links to all over the web. And you can't like reproduce the whole web from 1999 to like give the meaningful context. But what you can do is connect to public web archives like the Internet Archive or the UK National Library's web archive, and stream that in like on demand when someone clicks a link, and then maybe they're lucky that something is found in a public archive. But that would then not be like that software performing, but it would absolutely contribute to the environment that you encounter this software in.
Great. I think this was really helpful. halfway through this first round, I, you know, was reminded of the wildness, kind of that this entire festival is framed and okay, so it's definitely totally up to you what an archive is. But I think this suggestion that you get to define your archive, I think that's really helpful when we kind of start thinking about, okay, how can we archive a festival? What does that even mean? That we have a choice in how we define the goals for what the archive is. Okay, that's great. Let's talk a little bit about, on the notion of wildness, let's talk a little bit about the challenges that we encounter. I quite like this. I didn't come up with the title for the session, that is all fiber, but I quite like it because it speaks to the inherent condition of digital art, net art, media art, being in constant flux. So tools, technologies, protocols are ever changing, and with these changes, new processes, new creative practices emerge, and then the language changes as well, the terminology, taxonomies, et cetera, data models. So it's not surprise then that in between institutional archives and kind of the shoestring independent repositories that exist, things are a bit of a mess, right? And Gaby, Dragan and I, we attended a ZKM workshop on new media art archiving in February at ZKM, and it was quite interesting that they've done an internal poll of all the participating organizations and archives, and it revealed that even major institutions don't necessarily have the same guidelines, the same data models. So how can we then kind of, you know, find our way through this landscape and come to some sort of consistency? Maybe that is impossible. So maybe you can, all three of you can talk about some of the challenges that you encounter in your respective organizations and maybe share some lessons or some best practices in how we can kind of organize the wildness in the digital art milieu.
Yeah, I will almost start defining wildness, but okay. Here it looks quite exotic. You could also hallucinate, like so many hallucination is going on right now. Indeed, every strategy to document or to preserve or to archive, it has certain goals. And it's good to define that. So, as I said, for preservation's sake, we want to document the work and store parts in a way that in the future people can understand what we did and why, and are transparent in the decisions we make on the way. But there is also always the part of this part you cannot grasp. The title of the exhibition around the corner is about that. There are these parts you cannot grasp, or there are parts that's super tough to explain. Piratenradio is something I know. I don't have to think about what it is, but to explain it now to a younger audience is quite a challenge. So you also, at one hand, you want to be specific. At other hand, you want to be give enough information so people also understand what the context is, where it comes from. And sometimes making a documentation or a clip about an artwork is more informative than reworking the work itself. We do museum-based preservation, but we also do a lot of experiments. And we also commission interpretations of artworks, for instance. And this is to see, and not giving restrictions, it should look like this or it should be that, but from the notion of activating it. What is an archive word when it's only somewhere and no one looks at it, or no one is activating it or can experience it? So and let's not talk too much. Let's try to focus. I'm talking to myself, of course. How to translate these works into a new technology, into a new audience, to a new area, and what are what is the framework you're using? For instance, I always hope that there will be a time that at the Art Academy, documentation is key. How to document your work. It would be nice if people would be trained. And then you also know or figure out as soon as possible, if we have the same artwork or the same event, all of you would document it, you would do all something else. And the interesting thing then is, why is it different? What was it for you that you made that decision? And how can you make that very subjective or not as less subjective as possible? I'll come back to that later, I guess.
Dragan, Cathy, like any particular challenges within your organizations or practices that you constantly struggle with or butt your head against?
Yes, well, with the blueprint, I think one of the things when we talk about how subjective is the documentation and how subjective can we make it, is that with the blueprint we started with trying to find a format, and we decided to have this paper format because all the artworks we document are very performative or installations where you need to see everything in 3D. So making a video is also not, it's not like, oh, that's a good option. There's not a digital option which is necessarily better. And one of the things we realized when making them, like for the first one, we had quite a strict idea of what kind of chapters is a big word, but what kind of sections there would be in the blueprint. Like there are always the 4 sections, which is preparation, the ritual, documentation, inspiration in this case. But we pretty soon found out that was not going to work for all artists, because they were, so in the beginning we thought, oh, we're always going to have the same kind of sections, like what kind of material do you use, how is it connected, what is the setup process, etc. But we found out this is not a way of working, because the artist, and we let that in this case, this is really an artist led documentation. Like they can decide what do I want to have in it and what not. One of the things we do to make sure that certain information is available which might be interesting for people but is not fitting into a paper booklet, is that we have an online resource for every blueprint where we put things like video but also software code, which is evidently going to be not working anymore in a few years, but that at least it's still available, and it's probably quite readable in a few years, and you will have to rewrite it perhaps. So we have a digital archive, I would say, in this case, of what but the documentation is happening much more in the blueprint, in the way the artists want, and also talking about what their goals were, what their doubted, and what the aim of the artwork is. So sometimes you can, and why they made some certain decisions, and often also saying, like, if I would do this again, I would actually go into that direction more, or I would do, so it becomes some kind of publication which is also less focusing on necessarily recreating the artwork exactly as it is, but also opening it up. And that's also why we have the last sentence is, if you're inspired to improve or go beyond the ideas presented, please share your ideas broadly and let the artist know too. So it's like meant for people to, it's also meant for people to pick up the ideas and to recreate them, and to document it in such a way that the knowledge gained by the artist making the artwork is also given further to other artists.
Yeah, I really love this, and I also like how you're framing the project by essentially encouraging recreation, preservation through encouraging the recreation of an artwork, and as you describe it, setting the ideas free. That's really beautiful. Dragan, is there anything you want to add on the topics of key challenges that we might learn a thing or two from?
Yeah, I think the keyest of key challenges you already mentioned in the introduction to this panel, which is the resource constraints, or the lack of funding available. This is not only the case for I don't know, festivals, but also in general every when you think about with like state funding or other forms of like continuous funding being depleted everywhere, and every like support you're getting is very transactional. It's like, so you're getting support from that company that makes these virtual reality goggles. So you commission 5 artists to make I don't know, a virtual reality artwork, and to promote these goggles essentially, or to promote their product. So I think there is, this is something that kind of always also bothers me a little bit when people say, yeah, my practice is VR, or my practice is, I don't know. And this is like based on an incredibly complex supply chain of software tools and hardware, and which in the end is like you're like dependent on a very particular product that is incredibly complex to make, and that the people that sell it or that give it away for free also don't have any capacity to fully understand. And so while I mean, with preservation, you always have the luxury. You can you have like 10 years to solve the problems. So people do VR stuff, and then 5 years later, someone gets nostalgic and wants to see it again, or it's supposed to go in a retrospective exhibition or so. And then you need a bunch of, you need a lot of research to then understand, how do we operate with that supply chain that made this product gone, and how do we just navigate that. And another thing that I find also, particularly as a very much internet-focused organization, is that we can't activate artworks. Kind of people expect them to be online all the time, because everything is online all the time. So the amount of works that need to be monitored and taken care of is just growing over time. And it's the same with knowledge, that you need to remain, it needs to remain active in an institution. So let's say you're working at an insurance company and everything is on Windows 7, and then the IT department rolls out Windows 10. You don't need to think about Windows 7 ever again in your life, I hope. But when you're collecting software, you kind of need to know how Mac OS 7 works, and how Windows 98 works, and how Debian Linux from 10 years ago works. All of this is just an additive, it's an additive process. So yeah, that's a challenge.
That sounds terrifying.
Can I
It's
add?
fun, actually.
Yeah, no, it's great fun, really. We have the best job ever, but indeed, it's not well paid. We take care of many artworks, and we do our absolute best. And the museums and the government and all the festivals all rely on a lot of knowledge that we try to transfer, but the funding lacks. And that's quite an issue, and it's also crazy. If nothing will happen there, then this whole part of our history will be out of order. And Dragan is talking about 10 years. I'm not that optimistic. I would say it's even a bit less. It's great to work in this field. The nice thing when you start in the 70s, then there is also a lot of knowledge that we don't have, that we have to get from the technicians and the artists that are now actually in their 80s and gaining their knowledge and also the tactile knowledge, but also the equipment or the understanding how did it function, how did it work. So sometimes we make tutorials, video tutorials, how to. No. I know we were just working on some Amiga projects, so there are also some tutorials made, or some emulations are made. Great, but also these emulations get outdated. So it's preservation is not something you have done, but you will. It's an active process. It needs continuation as well. So that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, maybe we can talk briefly about. I definitely want to come back to that funding topic. Before I do, though, let's quickly talk about loss and the things that we cannot archive, and maybe even don't need to archive. So one of the things that makes the task of archiving, especially for people that don't have the expertise, so overwhelming, is identifying the challenge of identifying what is important and what to keep. And Annette Decker says that, quote, "It's important to accept loss, to accept decay, and to let go. Rather than obsessing over perfect preservation, we need to plant finds, fragments that trigger a memory." And I found that really beautiful, because sometimes you don't need the work, but you need a representation or something that kind of keeps the memory alive, and maybe that is sufficient in some cases. And I also want to come back to kind of related to that, kind of like memories and keeping memories alive. One thing that always bugs me a little bit is on the topic of funding. It's like in the cultural sector, it seems nothing moves without funding, right? I mean, of course, it's it's not a labor of love. It's but it seems like we cannot move an inch on archiving without there being like somebody having to write a grant. And Dragan, I know that you got started. You started as a musician. You were quite active in the micro music scene, and I have roots in the demo scene. So Amiga, yay! And I'm always so fascinated how these online communities that are just enthusiasts, really, without funding, without resources, they kind of self-organize and, in a messy way and in a non-professional way, they kind of take care of their histories. There are entire online databases that archive meticulously every chiptune that was ever released with all the metadata and all the context. And that is not necessarily preservation, right? But it's like a minimum of archiving. It's like this fragment that keeps a memory of something alive, that provides a little bit of context. And I'm always amazed that we don't seem to be able to really do that within kind of the digital art, the media art space. Not in a way that there's like I don't know, like this community energy where people just like communally, in solidarity take care of not just their own history, but also the history of the others, because they are so intertwined and connected. Maybe, is there anything we can learn from kind of like the wildness that exists out there?
Yeah, I want to jump right in there, because where does this idea come from that demo sceners or retro game enthusiasts are so that they don't have any resources? I mean, they have, obviously. And it's very also challenging to collaborate with them, because they have their value systems and their community practices that might overlap with what a cultural institution needs or doesn't need, or what its mission is. For instance, I know that demo scene in particular is very much a self-describing historical archiving effort. and it's very difficult to, I don't know, get an outsider view on it in there, or someone like explaining how this works, or any type of what Gaby mentioned is so important. It is not only the technical artifacts that need the mediation into the future, but also the surroundings. This can be very challenging. It's also true that a lot of preservation techniques that I'm using are coming from that world, but it doesn't mean that they are perfectly aligned. And these people have resources. They usually have very well-paying IT jobs, and can spend their free time on this. And I don't have any free time, so
Gotcha.
Because I'm doing.
Yeah.
So
I get it.
So
Fair
I think, and this is also the case when you think about networks of care and this idealistic view on community work. This is possible in some cases, for sure, but it cannot be generalized at all. And it, for instance, when you think about, let's say indie game communities or something like that. This is like a community that has very particular interests in a particular direction. They are very open. They are sharing information amongst each other, and they have also matching economic interests. Like they want to sell their games and they want to be able to make the next game and so forth. So that knowledge exchange is like part of what they need to do. But if you have like a Namjoon Pike work at every museum in the world, you know, it is incredibly challenging for each of these museums to, I don't know, take care of that exotic, very particular and artwork that doesn't match anything else that they have in their institution. And so of course, yeah, I would say, why don't you all just, I don't know, found some Namjoon Pike conservation institute, and you all wheel your pieces in there, and then there are people there who know how to repair TVs and neon tubes and video synthesizers, and then you just borrow it from them if you want to show it. But this then takes the economic resources away from the institution that is supposed to bring it to their audience. So this is always like a difficult thing. And I know in Europe, museums are much more collaborative, and also I guess in the Netherlands in particular. But for instance, museums in the US are very much like every person that buys a ticket at the other museum is like a lost ticket for us. It's a really backstabby sometimes environment. Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I know that some museums are not allowed even to link to other museums where the same artist may have something in the collection. So that's of course very bad, and that doesn't work. But I also don't believe that these community models can be just applied to institutions. And I think these hubs in the demo scene or in the indie game scene that are collecting these things, these are institutions too. They are institutions, and they have a very particular interest, and they were able to execute on that. And they have resources. But it's not something that you can just take and plant somewhere else.
Fair point. I mean, I did, obviously there's, you know, not just a little difference between like uploading or entering a chiptune into a database and preserving a piece by Namjoon Pike, obviously. So it's, but yeah, but sure. And yes, these people have jobs, but I think I don't know, I stand firm on, and yes, they're aligned around certain interests that might not align with, you know, interests on an institutional level. I'm just, there is a sense of care that I sometimes miss in our space, where organizations are primarily focused on their own archives, and they only care about what they are doing. I mean, not per se, but that's how it looks to, on the outside. Anyway, shall we come back to the point of to the topic of loss and what the things that we cannot keep and maybe shouldn't. I was interested in the Blueprint series. It's a great example for planting a fragment, and by doing that, making decisions about what to keep. And in this case, the ideas and the logics of the work. And I was wondering, Cathy, whether you could talk about a little bit of the process of analyzing sound works that are notoriously difficult to document, and then deciding what to preserve and what to pass on.
Yes. Well, I would first like to emphasize it are not only sound works that are really like, I know that our name is Instrument Inventors, and then people always think like, oh, it's all about sound, but it's not. The instrument is seen in a really, really broad sense. So this, for example, this work by Yolanda is a work where there's, you see the setup in the middle. There's a nice drawing here of the setup. People are lying down and here, and they have these glasses where you can see kind of 3D. There are LED lights, there are smells, so that there are all kind of different media going on at the same time. And well, what it always starts with, I always tell the artist, like, the more or less it should be written down in such a way that we know what inspired you, why you made certain decisions, but it also should be really able to create a very similar artwork just with the text and with the images what we have inside. So you really, and that's what you see here. You see kind of an overview, like how do you have to build it together, what kind of decisions did you make, and why did you, for example, what they often also write then is like, oh, I first tried this, but that did not work. So that's very unusual, I would say, for documentation to have something like what did not work. But because of, by understanding then, or that's what we hope for, is that by understanding what did not work, that other artists can get a kind of information out of that. Oh, wait, but that might actually work for what I want to do, because I would like to go more in that direction. So that's what we focus on a lot. And then the whole thing, it's really about like why did you make certain decisions, and also giving really information on how did you build something, why did you decide to like here there's for example written down plexiglass is lighter and easier to manipulate than glass, but the reflections will not be as clear as with glass, and it can easily become scratched. This is information which is kind of that's why she took the decision why she used real glass, but you could use plexiglass if you want that, and why to use that. So all this kind of information, and it's often a mixture of very different kind of things. So it's really focusing on just making this artwork. And then she also described where did she get the inspiration part, and that's what you see here, where she talks about how she started to look at Chladni figures, certain figures caused by sound waves and being visualized by visualized patterns of sound waves, and how that influenced her, and how she then started to found some other artists doing similar stuff, etc. And also this is also one of the versions of the work. So she also talks that there are other versions where she uses, for example, tactile transducers. So the audience lying down lies on a floor which is being brought into vibration by these tactile transducers, so you can feel the sound, but that's not yet in this artwork. So the fluidity of the artwork itself, it's really emphasized in the blueprint, so that it becomes also something where you hopefully other people can kind of grasp it and continue it further. But also I imagine that, and it's of course a very particular kind of documentation, and we also see it like that. We don't see it as anything which could replace documentation and archivation, by institutions specialized on that, but it's a very particular form where we hope that also for people who are doing, who are researching on the arts, or who are in some way interested, and even for people who are just interested in knowing a bit more, like how is this artwork made, that it's an access, a way of accessing the artwork in a slightly different way than just an article about it in a magazine.
Thank you. It's also, this brings me to my next point, because I think the Blueprint series is also an interesting form of activation and providing access, because archives are commonly viewed as kind of the final resting place of documentation that are guarded by experts and institutions, and not necessarily things that are in active use. So I'm wondering, maybe you can talk a little bit about how we can maybe, quote unquote, unarchive some of the knowledge and some of the works that kind of sit in our databases or in our repositories, in our archives. How can we kind of mobilize them, activate them, and re-enter them into the conversation? Because there is urgency also, you know, because we see that ideas kind of,
I have an example.
There's a lot of repetition, and I think it helps kind of just
I have an
the
example. We start in September working on the archive of Monique Toubosch. Monique Toubosch has a theater and contemporary art background, but also worked a lot with Michel Wijers. And she passed away, let's say, 10 years ago. And her archive is somewhere at an attic in Belgium. And we're going to make an exhibition in 2027. But we need the archive. Actually, I'm very curious to jump in it and see what we can find and what we can activate. We really use the archive in another context. That I would say we perform the archive, but we really use the archive to make the exhibition and to inspire. We also will invite people from Das Arts and the Rietveld Academy and the Sint-Joost to make interpretations, but we also will commission some works so people can enter the archive and make something new. And that will be all part of a larger project with not only Lima, but many different organizations. So that's a way how to activate and also bring, and of course there will be publication. So this is a way how to do it. The archive. I mean, then language. Unarchive or on-archive. So stopping archiving is also something, of course, and then see what pops up. Our own archive, we didn't do so much with it yet. We also decided not, and then I talk about all the posters and all the clippings and all the documentation. We decided not to digitize it. But first, we thought it was more interesting to make a sort of inventory, which names, which foci, which institution, which artists are appearing, and then open it up and ask people to research one of them or one of the exhibitions, or so not decide ourselves to where to dive into more into the detail and the depth, but do an open call and invite people to do so.
How about you two? Any kind of engagement strategies of resurfing history? I know that Rhizome just had this, I don't know if it's still on, the Rhizome World exhibition that had tons of activity around, really iconic pieces of software art.
Yes, I think what is something that Rhizome has really started doing is whenever there's an exhibition, Also to illustrate and to highlight trajectories and not have every artwork, as you said, like repeat something that you think you might have seen that in some other place or so, but you can do that when you're mixing old and new works. And I think one of the bit of the diseases of like new media art or also some festivals is everything has to be like new, and you don't want to see these histories and trajectories. And this also, I think, makes it very hard for artists, because if they don't have something that they can build their own practice on, something that came before them, they will be very much at the will of the tech industry in many cases. And if artists and also cultural institutions in general want to develop something of their own in that space, they need to connect to the history. That's like critically important. And that's also what we try to do for other institutions, by, even if they lack the expertise right now, maybe what you see in a lot of instances is that institutions in the 90s or the early 2000s, they totally jumped on the internet, like they're now jumping on whatever else, let's say AI or whatever. And they had people working in that field and being experts, but they moved on to something else. And they have a collection that they can't activate themselves anymore. And then we can do that for them and package it up in a way that makes it easy to integrate into an exhibition of newer work that they have like hands-on experience with. So I think that's also I think the main, a little bit coming back on the loss question or the curation question. Rhizome used to be a very open-ended, there was almost no curation in the early days. It was about establishing the art form at first. And then it turned to a much more curatorially controlled process, because otherwise the people that have a lot of resources have the most important voice. And that was, like in the 90s, it was people at high-end universities that had internet access and so forth. So I think that this making of connections and connecting work that is happening right now to work that used to happen in the past is it requires curatorial expertise. And of course, you can also just leave it to your audience or leave it to the internet in general. But I'm not totally convinced this works, because if you see, for instance, what is the most shared stuff or the most like, I don't know, just when you think about game preservation, everyone has preserved Super Mario and Mortal Kombat or something like that. But like, for instance, we started our emulation program with works by Theresa Duncan from 1993, 1994, 1995, which, to highlight a history of female game makers. And I think if there's nothing, if there's no curatorial vision or no curatorial mission, then you will also get a repetition of everything that's just the most popular. And I don't think that makes too much sense. That's already what BitTorrent is for. So you can get all the popular TV series or games or whatever on the Pirate Bay, let's say. But cultural institutions have to do something else.
Right. We have 2 minutes left. I don't think that is enough for an audience question, which really breaks my heart. I guess I have failed as a moderator. But I just want to thank, first of all, the guests. Thank you so much for your generosity, for your insights. I certainly learned a few things. I hope you did as well. I want to thank Fiber Festival for carving out a little panel space for talking about the past and safeguarding the past. And I wish you all a wonderful rest of the festival and everybody have a very nice day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Till next time.
Thank you.